Welcome back. So as you've seen on my channel, I have been playing a ton of Teamfight Tactics, and it is so much fun. However, the game has been changing pretty frequently every single week with multiple patches and hot fixes for balance. So I was thinking about doing a tier list of the units, the classes, the origins, and the items in the game, but I thought about it and I decided that because there's another patch coming out next week, Twisted Fate, some ability changes, things like that, I was just gonna make a video going over every single unit in the game, covering their strengths, weaknesses, and common items, so that you have the knowledge to go into your matches and make good, flexible decisions. And of course, you like this video, like down below, comment, you know the whole deal, and come check me out on my live stream. I stream Mondays through Thursdays in the afternoon Eastern time, playing Teamfight Tactics and going over my analysis. I also love to think out loud when I'm playing and going over every single decision I'm making. And so if you check out the other videos on my channel, I have a bunch of Teamfight Tactics matches where the whole game long, I'm just thinking out loud, going over my thought process, and hopefully you can learn vicariously through me and improve your game at the same time. So without further ado, this is breaking down every unit in Teamfight Tactics. Let's go!
I decided to do this video in order of cost. I could have done classes or origins or various other different orders, but I wanted to do in order of cost because while you're going through the game, this is the order the units are going to show up in. So it helps you kind of pace out the choices you're making throughout the game. And if you don't know, the unit drop rates change every time you level. So keep this in mind if you're planning to build low cost units for the end of the game, as they will start showing up very infrequently. Your Darius's, that kind of thing. First up is Darius. Now, Darius is an Imperial Knight, and he is one of the more valuable units you're going to pick up in the beginning of the game. He has good starting stats, even at level 1, and has a really good AoE swing that allows him to deal damage and heal himself. Healing is a very valuable asset in the beginning of the game, so your Nidalees, your Lulus, your Dariuses, because it gives you so much more value per unit. And realistically, when you're playing an auto battler like Teamfight Tactics, you want to make sure you maximize the value output of every single unit. You want each unit to use their ultimate, you want each unit to get a couple shots in, if not more, and make sure you're maximizing that value. So with Darius, he's pretty straightforward. He works great with 2 pairs of knights. If you pick up a Garen and a Darius, that can be your front line for the first 15 to 20 rounds of the game. And he actually has a really good synergy with a Katarina, because that Imperial bonus can pick up really early in the game, or even if you get lucky and you pick up a Draven as well. So a very standard unit, can be picked up almost always and will fit into a comp. You don't even need, realistically, the knight bonus to use him properly. He's just a good frontline unit that does decent damage as well. Items that work well on him are going to be the Gunblade, because it increases his damage and his heal from the spin. Very valuable and increases his value. If you have any tank items on him and he uses his Gunblade with the spin, it just makes him even tankier, which is great. Keeps a frontline up longer. And then generally good tank items, Dragon's Tooth or Phantom Dancer, keeps them alive longer, especially if they're running an assassin comp, because it prevents the crits from happening, and also make sure that he has to be hit with physical damage, so he's not dying to massive AoE. The next one cost unit is Fiona, and I have a love-hate relationship with this unit. She is useful for early Blade Master transitions and around the mid game if you need that Blade Master, but as a unit, she's actually fairly weak. She doesn't have a whole lot of base stats that keep her going. She dies rather easily. Her attack speed's kind of low, and so it's hard for her to get good hits in. And on top of that, the animation for her ultimate ability takes a while, so sometimes you're just not getting a lot of throughput out of her, and she doesn't scale that well into late game. So usually if you're going nobles or if you're going with Blade Masters, you want to work her out of your build as fast as possible, because there's so many better options besides Fiona. That being said, in the very beginning of the game, when it's only 1 cost and then going into 2 costs after level 3, the noble buff you get for 3 nobles right now is one of the most valuable starting synergies you can get. 100 armor plus 35 health per hit on any unit in the first 5 to 10 rounds basically almost guarantees your win that round. It's a very valuable synergy until they change it. So Fiora can get you with a Lucien and a Garen, or even a Vayne, you can get that 3 bonus on noble and win the early game pretty easily. So keep that in mind. Items that work well with Fiora, there's not a lot of items that I'd be comfortable putting on the Fiora. The only thought there is that if you know you're going to sell Fiora, and you should know that, you can put some items on her knowing that they're just going to be brought right back to your inventory. But that being said, if you're in a pinch and she's, you know, tier 2 or tier 3 super fast, you can throw a Titanic Hydra on her. She has decent health, not a lot of damage output, so that helps her kind of stand in the front and hit the Titanic Hydra, get the splash damage. Although keep in mind that Titanic Hydra can be a double-edged sword, I guess mace in this case, because late game, the extra splash damage will build more mana on the enemy team, which means if you're going against elementalists or sorcerers, you're just making them cast more often, so it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword. She's also really great with a Phantom Dancer because it does give her a little bit of tankiness, some extra attack speed, which she desperately needs. Her base attack speed is kind of slow, and it also makes it so that when she's going up against assassins, she wins most 1v1s in that case if she has a Phantom Dancer, because she has the damage immunity during her ultimate, and then she can really get some damage out on a single target. The next 1-cost unit is Garen the Big Man. This guy just got a nerf about a week ago, and he's still super strong. The nerf was the damage to his spin, which was desperately needed, but this man is insane. If you think about what he brings to a fight, his ability is to deal damage in AoE and also become magic immune. He's not CC immune, so you can still stun him, knock him up, interrupt him, whatever, but he will spin and deal the damage regardless. And what's great about this is because if he steps up front and he gets some good spin damage out, he can also eat an Ashe arrow early on. He can eat specific magic damage on a target, anything that like comes out from like an Ahri, something like that. And in the early stages of the game, this can be invaluable because only one ult usually comes off when the fighting is slow. And so that magic mini is big. Items that work well on him is Morello's, because it'll apply the Morello's dot every single time he hits with the spin, which can keep that percentage-based damage ticking on the entire enemy team. And he's also has great base stats. So HP, armor, attack speed, overall, he's just a very good, well-built unit. And it's almost never really a bad idea to build Garen, even if you're not going Knights or Nobles, because he can actually make a big splash in the beginning of the game. If you really want to get tricksy with him, Phantom Dancer is always really good on units like this. You can get a Ludens as well, because he generally will cast more with the extra mana from the Ludens. And Gunblade isn't bad either for the same reason that it works on Darius. Increases his heal, increases his tankiness, and therefore increases his life on the field and therefore his value. The next 1-cost unit is Graves. Graves actually is a very interesting and a very flexible unit. Not many people give him credit for how flexible he can be. So he is a gunslinger. He's also a pirate. So if you end up getting a Pyke early or a Gangplank, you can get that pirate bonus, which can actually give you a good amount of gold if you keep it for 5+ rounds or so. But he's also a gunslinger, and gunslingers right now are a little bit misunderstood. A lot of people will play them more like rangers in that they'll put attack items on them. If you build pure attack item gunslingers, you'll most likely lose the end of the game. Also because the best gunslinger, Misfortune, is more of an ability character rather than an attack character, because the ultimate's so good. So Graves, and you'll see with the rest of the gunslingers in this video, is more about upfront tankiness. You can use him as a tank early on. If you get any on-hit items for him, like Titanic Hydra, a Shen, the Sword Breaker, anything that applies. And then Red Buff is also a great one, because all of his targets that get hit in his cone will get hit by on-hit effects like Red Buff. And so the actual overall damage output of Graves, when you can get him in the right spot, can be enormous, because he can apply Red Buff or Disarm or Silence to upwards of 3, 4, 5 targets if you line it up right. So you can use him as a stand-in front line or as one of the 4 gunslingers, and then just make sure you're building more on-hit effects for him. Kha'zix is a very interesting character. He has a really high drop rate. In fact, you see him more often than not, and you can end up seeing a Kha'zix tier 3 in round 3 or 4. I swear, I've seen Kha'zix 3 right after the minion wave because they just got so many of them. So he's a very good early game unit. He falls off pretty hard late game. You can build him a little more ability based because his single target is pretty decent, but wasting a Shojin's on him isn't that valuable unless you know you're going to sell him and you're going to get that item back. He has really decent base stats and can be pretty much added to almost any comp in the first 20 to 25 rounds and be effective. A good single target burst with his ultimate, decent enough base stats we can deal some damage. And with most assassins, if you just put an Infinity Edge on him or a Divine Sword on him, he will actually deal pretty decent output. He shouldn't be factored into your late game, but he's not bad early game. He's pretty good. So generally, if this is an option for you, or if you want to run Void, which personally Void doesn't work most cases. There's some cases where Void works, but 50% armor reduction isn't that great in most scenarios. But if you want to run a Void build, you can with him. Kassadin is one of the most frustrating units in the game because his overall value for being a one cost is astronomical. He has good tank because he's adding shields to himself and his base stats are pretty decent. He also fits into Void builds as well, or Sorcerer builds. He gets you jump started. So if you plan on going a Sorcerer build, he works right in and gets you that mid-game transition to 3 Sorcerers and eventually working up to 6 if you're going to go ASOL or anything like that. But he also brings Mana Shred without the need for demons. That Mana Shred can be super valuable because everything that you'll see for front lines, a Sejuani, a Cho'gath, even a Garen or a Darius, if they're up front and you put your Kassadin up front with 1 tank item or even no items, he will pull mana off that target and prevent them from ulting. And most initiators are placed up front. So if Kassadin's there to shut them down, super valuable. He's also good when the numbers dwindle down to 1 or 2 units remaining on either side, because again, he'll prevent them from ulting, but he also has a lot of self-sustain regardless of his HP point, because if he's hitting and getting shields on every single hit, he's just becoming tankier as he's fighting. So a very great early to mid game unit. Even if he's tier 3, you generally want to work him out towards the late game because he doesn't fit as well unless you need him for your 6th Sorcerer and you don't really have a Yumi's yet. But you generally want to start working him out. Great early game unit, but doesn't stick all the way through. Ah, poor Mordekaiser. This guy is fantastically awful. He's just not that great in almost any category. His HP isn't that high for a knight. His ability takes a while to build up because it's such a low attack speed. Even when the ability goes off, it usually only hits 1 person, even though it attacks in a line. And even that doesn't do a crazy amount of damage on top of that. He is a Phantom, so if you were to work in a Kindred or maybe even going for Karthus on the Sorcerer, it can be nice in some situations to get the 2 Phantom bonus, especially against the big boss creep rounds, because the Phantom effect does work on Dragon, Rift Guardian, all of those. But generally you want to avoid Mordekaiser because he just isn't that good. We may see updates in the future where his base stats are brought up. I think if either his armor and health went up a moderate amount, or his attack speed was brought up a good bit, or even if we added more ability damage to his ultimate, he would be a better unit. But just generally, unless you need him for 5 or 6 nights or it's only the first 5 rounds, try to avoid Mordekaiser. He doesn't really stick through and isn't valuable for what you're getting. Items that work well on him though, Titanic Hydra is a great one because Titanic Hydra does scale off the wearer's HP, and Mordekaiser is a knight, and so if you get him to tier 2, he has decent HP. He also is going to be up in the front line. You kind of want to sacrifice him anyway, so he'll be smashing down and breaking things and exploding on people, all good stuff, but generally, again, not a great unit. Nidalee is one of the units that I look at right now as needing an adjustment, because Nidalee fits into the category for me of you can put her in almost any comp and she will be valuable. She doesn't scale super well into late game, but she actually can be a hyper carry if you stack all the items on her, getting 1 or 2 Rage Blades and a Bloodthirster, because when she transitions into her cat form, she has scaling attack damage, and then the actual attack speed that she'll build up by the time she gets there with a Rage Blade, pretty ridiculous. I also get kind of irritated by the fact that in the early stages of the game, her value on the game board is immense. She deals damage from range, transforms and does more damage, but when she transforms, she applies a hot to herself and a hot to a teammate. So she's healing herself, she's healing a teammate, which already adds tons of value, but on top of that, she does tons of damage. She also fits into the 4 or 2 wild bonus, which is easy to get early on and very valuable. And she fits into shapeshifters at a 1 cost. So generally picking up Nidalee early on, regardless of whatever synergies you have or what you're trying to build for mid game, is almost always a good choice. She is incredibly valuable and one of the best units in the game right now. Items that work well on her, like I mentioned, Rage Blades are great because you're already getting that base attack damage increase from her transformation. You can also get Bloodthirsters for lifesteal. I wouldn't use any casting items on any shapeshifter, like your Ludens, your Shojins, things like that, because they only transform once. There's no reason to waste it on them when you can put it on somebody else. But attack speed is really great on her. Lifesteal is really great on her. You can even put a Phantom Dancer if you want, and then get her a little bit tankier and increase the attack speed. But a fantastic unit. Right now, she's always valuable. Tristana's kind of in a weird spot right now. She can be your gunslinger hyper carry. She's also probably the only gunslinger right now besides Misfortune that's good to pick up even if you're not going gunslingers. You can actually put a death cap on her, which I've tried before, and her mines end up doing 400 or 500 damage in splash, which is pretty scary. It's level of brand, so you can actually get some good damage off her mines. But the focus usually for her, because she is a gunslinger, is that 4 gunslinger bonus and getting on hit effects, right? Your shuns, those kind of things you want to apply to everyone. Red buff. She's also really good for static shiv, as most gunslingers are, because they attack so much. It's triggering that splash a lot. But she can be a hyper carry if you want her late game. The problem is she will cast enough to interrupt that, which is why a ranger is probably better for that. Generally okay to pick up in the beginning for good range damage if you need it. Works well with a rapid fire cannon for range, helps her not to move around as much, make sure she attacks more, and then on hit items like every other gunslinger, because the extra attacks will trigger those. Vayne is a really easy unit to pick up and get extra damage out of her early game. She's a 1 cost, she's a noble, she works with rangers, so if you get a Varus early, you can get that 2 ranger bonus and try to get some extra damage out. Her passive is also great because it does percentage HP as well, so if you run up against a Warwick early that they found a Warmog, or they got something tanky on him, the passive from Vayne can be super valuable in shredding that target. It's also good against knights, because knights will be lowering the flat damage per attack in the early game, and so her passive will be really great at that. You can also make her a glacial with the frozen mallet, plus the extra attack speed from ranger bonus. She fits well into glacial builds, as all rangers do, so generally a very good unit. She can become a hyper carry as well if you put a bunch of items on her late game, and the fact that she doesn't have an ability means that she's a perfect target for just stacking tons of items. Generally, I like frozen mallet, turning her into a glacial, but Rage Blade is always really great. Bloodthirster is great. Infinity Edge is really great for her. Any kind of attack item that you can put on her is great, because she's never going to interrupt her attacks with her passive. She just shoots the entire time. Rapid Fire Cannon's great. I've actually tried Hurricane on her as well, which, you know, is great with the glacial bonus, and then plus the 4 ranger bonus can work out too. Warwick is the last 1 cost. He's super valuable, but there's a lot of subtle nuances that go to using Warwick. He has probably the bumpiest useful curve per game length, right? If you charted out how useful a unit is over time, his actually changes a lot, because his ultimate is good for singling a target out. It also is good for healing himself. The throughput, as we talked about before, super valuable for someone like Warwick. He also fits into the wild bonus, which means that if you just get a Rengar, an Ahri, a Nidalee, and him into the early game, you get the 4 wild bonus, which is great. He's also a brawler. Brawlers can be pretty good in the early game, because 300 or 700 health if you get 4 of them is pretty damn good. It falls off later in the game because you just need more team fight presence than HP, but he's super valuable in that front. Just be careful about using him too long. My advice is the first 10 rounds, he's super valuable. If you can get him to quick 2 or a quick 3, he's super strong. Put a tanky item like a Warmogs on him, Phantom Dancer, even the Blade Mail, super great, because anyone that attacks him gets shredded. But generally, you want to start working him out towards the mid to late game, as there's better options for wild, and brawlers fall off pretty hard. It's Ahri time! Ahri is a super underrated unit. She fits into the wild category, and she's 2 cost. She's also a sorcerer, so it's pretty easy to get her to the mid game for 3 sorcerers, a Veigar, an Ahri, things like that. Her ability is actually really frequent. You can build up mana on her pretty fast, and it's great for things like Morellos, because it hits so many different targets. Even a Gunblade can work on her if you get enough line and you position her properly. But generally, she's overall a really good unit. She's not the best, not bad. She fits into most lineups, and she can go well into late game. Going to tier 3 probably isn't the best for her, because there's better sorcerers that you can choose. Aurelion Sol, things like that. Even Karthus I would pick over Ahri in the late game, because she's so positional dependent, and when the team sizes get bigger, it's harder to guarantee that she's gonna hit a lot of people. But she can be really powerful in the early stages of the game, and if you get good items on her like a Death Cap or a Morellos, she can carry you to mid game. It's Blitzcrank! Blitzcrank is a 2 cost brawler robot. He's currently the only robot in the game. The robot bonus means that he just starts the round with full mana. It's kind of like the dragon bonus in auto chess. The thing about Blitzcrank is he's probably the biggest disparity between level 1 and level 2. If you get him to level 2, he's actually terrifying. His level 1's not that strong, but the only item I would really recommend on Blitzcrank is going to be a Shogun's. If he hooks constantly, he can be very disruptive. You can put some tanky items, and I've actually seen people try to go more damage items as well, things like IE or whatever. It's hard to get that working, but I think the big thing for Blitzcrank is you end up getting him out of your build unless there's a very specific situation. Blitzcrank and Anivia are two of my favorite units to play against a team that is pocketing hyper carries, right? So if they have a Draven or a Vayne in the corner of their build and they're just piling units around them to keep them safe, Blitzcrank and Anivia can be great for breaking that up because he'll pull the target out and Anivia will apply attack speed slow. So things like that are great. He's really good early. Unless you get him to level 2, I wouldn't keep him in the mid game because he just is too weak and doesn't do enough damage to make any difference. But if you do get him to level 2, or if you have the brawler bonus, super good. As far as items, really Shogun's is one of the best. There's a couple other items that you can put on him, but I think there's better targets than Blitzcrank other than the Shogun's. Big boy Braum is a glacial guardian. He works really well with the other guardian in the game, Leona. So if you put both of them in and kind of stagger them so they apply the armor bonus to as many people as possible on your team, that armor can be really big, especially against gunslingers, rangers, and assassins. Any attack-based build, having that extra armor can be really, really valuable. So getting the Guardians in there. He also has his ability to block damage from the front. I've found this to be very hit or miss because he can easily get turned around and put his shield up a little bit in the weird direction or not blocking in the right spot. It's hard to get that positioning right, especially if assassins jump over him and turn him around. On top of that, he doesn't have enough innate takiness where he tends to survive long enough to use the shield and stay up for the whole duration of it, but he's great up front. He works awesome in glacial builds because it gives you that frontliner along with the Sejuani. As far as items, he's a great target for a lot of these support-based or frontline items, Frozen Heart, Redemption. I wouldn't generally recommend an Ionic Spark in most games, but it can work well on him. And also things like Zeke's Herald or Locket. If you're gonna get a lot of Lockets, one Locket usually isn't valuable, but if you get 2 or 3 stacked up, it can be super good, especially if you're going against an AoE kind of comp. But specifically for Braum, great target for those support-based items. I don't think they should go on anyone else. Elise is a 2-cost demon shapeshifter. She actually has a lot of power on the field if she gets her ult off because she will spawn 2, 3, or 4 spiders depending on her tier. The cannon fodder is really great, especially for single target characters that will end up turning and shooting the spiders, and works great as well with a redemption. If you put a redemption on a target you know is going to die and that big AoE heal hits on all the spiders, you can get a crazy amount of longevity out of Elise and her spawned spiders. She doesn't work super well with attack items, but if you put tanky items on her, she can be pretty powerful. Things like the Frozen Heart is great because she's melee. She's going to get in there and put that aura out there. She can also work well with a Titanic Hydra or a Phantom Dancer, keep her tanky and then make sure that she's splashing to targets. But again, be careful about the Titanic Hydra in the late game. We're going to give a lot more mana to the enemy team. Lissandra is a glacial elementalist. She works super well early on because she can end up using her ultimate on herself and keeping herself tanky or preventing damage. It is a little bit slower for AoEs because it hits and then radiates out. As it is with Kha'zix, any ability that takes a while to go off can be interrupted or can be avoided. You generally don't like these over the ones that will be instantly applied. If you compare Lissandra's AoE versus like a Brand AoE or even Aurelion Sol that's basically instant, it's pretty hard to go against, but she does work well in elemental comps, which make up for some of their shortcomings by the fact that they spawn a massive golem in front. And she also works well in glacial builds, obviously. She can be really good at stunning and interrupting with her ultimate and then stunning and interrupting with her glacial bonus. So generally, if you're going elementalist or glacial, she fits in. She's not the best unit in the game. She's about average, and she can work well in very early circumstances, but mid to late game, I would not keep her unless you're going glacial elementalist. Items that work well on her, I generally don't like doing death cap on her. There's far better targets besides her. Generally, she's just there for CC and control. So things that are support based are great to put on her because you know you're not going to stack items on her. Locket, Zeke's, things like that. Lucien is a noble gunslinger for 2 cost. This unit probably needs to be fixed a little bit. The way his dash works sometimes bugs out. And I don't believe it actually triggers Ludens either, and I think that needs to be fixed. Lucien doesn't scale super well into late game. His base stats and stat scaling aren't as good as, say, a Tristana under the gunslingers. But again, it is a great way to get that 4 gunslinger bonus. Or if you're going for 3 or 6 nobles, he can fit into that as well. For a pure unit, I generally wouldn't pick him and put him in the comp unless you're going noble or gunslinger. Otherwise, ignore him. He's not super great. And as far as items, he's just like every other gunslinger. Get on-hit items that will work with the 4 gunslinger bonus that hits everyone. He also works pretty well with a Shojin's or a static Shiv, because he does attack with the dash, which triggers those extra bonuses, and he can end up dashing around a lot. He also is pretty good against assassin comps, because if he dashes enough, he can disengage the target, and the assassin may switch to a new target that's full health, and that can be pretty valuable. Lulu is insane. She is just like Nidalee, where you can put her in any comp. I don't care if you're going Yordle or Sorcerer or anything else. She fits in every single comp right now until maybe the very, very end of the game. Her ultimate gives maximum HP and has a CC knockup on it. Not only that, but it works in AoE and applies to pets. That means that her HP bonus will work on the Elementalist Golem. It'll work on Elise's spiders, things like that. Overall, especially if you put a Shojin's on her and she's ulting all the damn time, her individual value to a team is crazy. She is so strong right now. She can be a good for Sorcerer. Yordles aren't super great right now because you have better options other than the miss chance, which is more RNG versus some very palpable straight up benefits that you get with other classes and origins, but it can be a good addition. But regardless of synergies, throwing a Lulu in, if you get her, especially if you get her to tier 2 or you can get a Shojin's on her, disgusting. Pyke is a 2-cost pirate assassin. Works great if you're trying to get the early pirate bonus to get some extra gold in the mid game. As far as assassins go, his damage isn't the highest, but that's not why you pick Pyke. Pyke is actually probably one of the best units in the game right now, especially if you get a Shojin's on him, because he ults so frequently. But not only that, it's a very large AoE. I've actually run games where I put tank items and a Shojin's on Pyke, and I put him up front so he doesn't jump, and he ends up just ulting and ulting and ulting. The crazy thing about this strategy as well is because he jumps with his ult, he will disengage whoever's attacking him and then stun a big wide range. He did get adjusted about 2 days ago with the stun duration going down, but I think regardless of this nerf, he's still one of the best units in the game, and very flexible too. You can use him as a frontline initiator if you need to, but he will need a tank item, or just generally in an assassin build, you put him in there, he'll get some really, really clutch stuns. As far as items go, Shojin's is a great choice for him. Anyone that you need very frequent ults from, Shojin's is going to be your best option. You can also use a Seraphs if you really want him to ult at the very beginning of the game, which can work well. But when it comes to like attack items or crit items, there's other assassins that you want to put it on. He's not the highest damage dealer of the assassin group, but he's really good for CC. Rek'sai is a 2-cost Void Brawler. She is a bit of a black sheep in my eyes because she drops a little bit less than the other 2 costs in my experience. It's kind of hard to find her when you're looking for her. As far as Brawler bonus goes, it can be good in the beginning, but there's better Void options. You probably want the other 3 Void besides her, and her damage doesn't work as well either. So again, I think if you can find 3 Rek'sais in the beginning and you can get her to tier 2, it can be super nice. I wouldn't put too many items on her, and Brawler only works for the beginning of the game or the mid game. So, you know, I generally try to avoid her unless I know I'm going 3 Void or I have 2 Brawler in the beginning, and that's it. But if you are looking for what items to use on her, she can be pretty good with good tank items just like Warwick. So a Warmogs, a Thorn Mail, things like that can be great. I also like putting Frozen Heart on her because she will end up repositioning when she uses her ultimate, which means that she'll start applying that aura of the Frozen Heart to backline carries like a Vayne or a Varus, which can be really invaluable when you're trying to prevent them from attacking as much. Shen is a little bit underrated in my eyes. He is a Blade Master Ninja at 2 cost. Works great if you're trying to do the 4 ninja build. The 4 ninja build is super awkward and really hard to build for because you have to have all 4 ninjas to put it out to get the max benefit from it. The weird part is that the ninjas are all different classes, the same origin, but different classes. So it's kind of hard. Are you working into a Blade Master or an Assassin build? In Blade Master build, Shen's a great front line because he absorbs a good amount of damage. He has okay, about moderate tanky stats, but his passive, if you use it properly, can be really devastating. So what it does is he ults and then will create an aura around him that makes you dodge attacks. What I found to work really well for this is if you're not going Blade Master, I like using the Ghost Blade to turn him into an assassin. And what this means is he'll jump back with the other assassins and then proc that AoE dodge with the other assassins that are trying to kill people. This strategy works really, really well, and he can actually be a good frontline if you don't want to do this either. As far as Blade Masters go, unless you're going for 6 Blade Masters, there's other choices besides Shen, but he's a good moderate unit to pick up if you're going Blade Masters or if you're trying to get ninjas, although again, the ninja thing's kind of hard to build for, and generally you only want 1 ninja out or none. So unless you're going Blade Master, he's pretty much moderate to avoid if you don't need him kind of thing. But if you're doing Blade Masters, have at it. As far as items that work great on him, again, I like doing Ghost Blade on him to make him jump back and use his ultimate and then AoE, but he also works well with tanky items, you know, Warmogs, Dragon's Tooth, even a Titanic Hydra can work pretty well because he has a decent attack speed as well. So about a moderate unit, not the best, but he can be useful in Blade Master builds. Good old Varus. Varus is a 2-cost Demon Ranger. He works well in Ranger comps and probably will be the Ranger you pick up early to go along with a Vayne. Ashe can sometimes be hard to pick up because people like picking her up for the damage and CC that she provides, and Glacial's far more common than for a Ranger, so a lot of times Ashe will just disappear more naturally than a Varus. But Varus has a lot of value himself. His ultimate ability does crazy damage and scales pretty well. I've actually run Death Cap on him for this reason and can be very effective if you use it in the right light. Generally good if you're going to go for a 4 Ranger build, which honestly only works if you're doing Glacial to make sure that they apply, which means that if you put a Frozen Mallet on him, he will get that attack speed bonus and then freeze people as well, which I think works awesomely. Glacial and Ranger tend to have a very good lineup. The reason Glacial and Ranger works well is because when you put Rangers in the field, they don't kill as fast as, say, sorcerers or assassins, so they want to have more uptime to keep those shots. They have very consistent damage. So pairing Glacial, which slows the games down by stunning enemy targets, with the Rangers that have consistent non-burst damage works super well. It's almost like a match made in heaven. So Frozen Mallet's great on him. You can Death Cap if you really want to. You can also Rage Blade or Bloodthirster and just do pure Ranger. There are certain situations where you can do a Hurricane, although there's generally better uses for your spatula than just building the Hurricane. But if you want to put a Hurricane on a Ranger build, especially with Glacial, it can actually work out. Zed is a 2-cost Ninja Assassin and is probably the best single ninja you can put out in the beginning of the game, say the first 10-15 rounds. He does a decent amount of damage with his auto attacks. He also has decent base stats to keep himself alive, and on top of that, his ability can be pretty effective, albeit kind of hit or miss. It's like the Ahri orb, but doesn't go as far and isn't as wide. And so a lot of times he may shoot it the wrong direction. He may only hit one target. It's not as consistent or reliable as, say, an Ahri line attack is, especially since it doesn't come back, but it can be super clutch in the right situation. So if you don't have the Akali yet, if you're putting out one ninja, I would say Zed's a good choice. He's also really good for early assassin comps because sometimes people won't pick him up for the same reason that they want to have another ninja, or maybe they're not going assassin. So overall, pretty good unit. Probably put him at like a tier 2 or a tier 3. Works great in ninja comps, works great in assassin comps. Items that you can put on him, pretty standard for most assassins. The Infinity Edge and Sword of the Divine works well if you're doing all crits. And you can actually do Ludens as well. He does proc his ultimate enough to be viable for it, although there are better targets, but he's not a bad option if you want to do a Morellos or a Ludens. Aatrox is so close to being good. He's like average. Works great in Blade Master comps, especially if you're going demons on top of that, which is good for the other extra attacks, which shreds mana. Good synergy there. He's not outstanding stellar. He's no Draven. He's no Yasuo in the Blade Master comps, but he is pretty decent. He can do some good AoE. If you get a couple items on him, he can be pretty scary, but he's about run-of-the-mill average as far as his value. So unless you're going full demon or you want to get Blade Masters fast, he's not the best unit to pick up, but he can do some good output. As far as items that work well on him, Bloodthirster keeps him alive. Titanic Hydra can be pretty good because he does have a little bit above average HP, and also he will be attacking a decent amount. I've tried ability items like Shojin's on him, but he's not tanky enough to stay alive. He does get himself into trouble, and his AoE from his ability isn't super great. It's about moderate damage. I've even tried Death Cap on him, and that didn't feel that great. So he's really only good if you're doing Demons and Blade Masters. Otherwise, you can avoid him. Ashe is pretty sought after. She's a 3-cost Ranger Glacial. Fits perfectly into the Glacial build, and as we talked about earlier, Rangers and Glacials are kind of a match made in heaven. So here you go. On top of that, she has a perfect ultimate for CCing single targets and dealing damage at the same time. And this works great with a Shojin's if you don't have other CC options, right? Say you missed the Sejuani, you're not getting Cho'gaths or Gnars early on, and you just need more CC in the mix as it's getting to mid game and you don't have any. Ashe is a great option. Even if she's tier 1, the Shojin's works great on her. But she also can be a hyper carry if you put the items on her, Rage Blade, Bloodthirster, things like that. And then stacking up on the Glacial bonus can work great. Overall, a pretty decent unit to pick up no matter what. She is pretty costly at 3 cost, but again, if you're doing Glacial Ranger, definitely pick her up. And she can work outside of that if you're desperate for some CC. Evelynn is a 3 cost demon assassin, and to me, she's probably one of the more underrated units in the game. Her ability actually scales really well and does tons of damage. I ran a tier 2 Evelynn with an assassin build with a death cap, and she was hitting for 1300 in AoE, which is more than some sorcerers do. So she has a great ability output. Some people build her for crit. I like building her in assassin comps with a ability bonus on her. So like a death cap or a Ludens, things like that, to give her a little bit more bonus would be perfect for her. And I think she's a great addition to the assassin comp, right? Because most of the assassins are going to be dealing decent damage in single target. Some do good AoE in front of them like the Akali, but hers isn't as big as the Evelynn, and Evelynn's ult can actually change the course of a team fight for assassins. So it's almost like you have this big burst built in, a very underrated unit. I'd actually put her at about tier 3, tier 2 if you're looking to get her into the game. If you're running assassins or demons, or you generally just need some good burst, she's kind of, in my mind, more like the Kha'zix in that if you need some extra damage, she's great. She is pricey, but I think she's actually a very underrated unit that more people should be using. On top of that, the Gunblade works well on her too because she does disengage when she uses her ability. She goes across the board. So doing good AoE in front of her, healing on that, and then resetting can make her super valuable. And it's Gangplank. He is a 3 cost pirate, blade master, gunslinger. Because he's a dual gunslinger blade master, he's almost necessary for either build. You usually will not get 4 gunslingers without Gangplank, and it's super hard to get 3 blade master or more without him as well. The secret to Gangplank is he actually has a huge bonus to damage with his ultimate, but his ultimate is very misunderstood on how it works. So the way Gangplank's ultimate works is he will periodically, and this is a random chance, throw out barrels all over the map, and then when he gets to 100 mana, he will proc his ultimate, detonating all of those bombs. And these can do 400 plus damage in AoE and stack. I've actually killed 4 units instantaneously when he got his ult off. And so for that reason, I like building him a mixture of tanky and then CD based or damage based on the ability. I've run Shojin's death cap on him or even a Seraph's on him, and just one tank item to make sure he stays alive long enough to use his ult. Especially if you get lucky and he spawns tons of barrels, he can actually blow a whole team up. And if you put that with the gunslinger bonus where you're doing tons of AoE and his bombs finish them off, or even Blade Master where you need to pick off some squishy targets, Gangplank is a little bit underrated. He's necessary for Blade Master and gunslinger builds, but I think people discredit him for his actual damage output because he does need an item or two to get that ultimate off properly. But once you do, it's terrifying. Katarina is a 3 cost Imperial Assassin. Super great ultimate if she gets it off at the right time. At tier 1, she will usually die before she can get it off. So you want to make sure you get Katarina to at least tier 2, as with most units. And then you can put things like the Morellos or the Ludens on her. She actually works great with Gunblade for the same reason that Darius works well with Gunblade. Increases the healing, the damage you come out of it, and you actually can make sure that she stays alive while the spin is there. And I've run games where I put a Phantom Dancer and a Gunblade on her, and because she has the extra armor and she can't be crit, and she's healing herself while she's dealing damage in AoE, she becomes a really hard unit to deal with, and she fits perfectly into assassin comps and Imperial comps. Imperial comps can be pretty scary, especially if you're going Blade Master with Draven or Shapeshifter with Swain, because the added bonus damage, the double damage that all the Imperials get at 4 is nuts. And if you get Gunblade on Katarina with a 4 Imperial bonus, she's terrifying. She's a very powerful unit, probably one of the better 3 costs you can get, but only works in Imperial and Assassin builds. As far as a single Assassin goes, I wouldn't pick her up for extra damage unless you can get her to tier 2 really fast, because her tier 1 is pretty shit. Kennen is a 3 cost Ninja Yordle Elementalist. This unit to me is a little misplaced. I think some of his synergies don't make as much sense. He's pretty necessary for getting the Elementalist bonus, especially early on, and does decent damage. The way I've found to use Kennen best, because personally for me, the ultimate for Kennen doesn't do a lot of damage. What it's really better for is the CC plus a little damage. So I've actually run him with a Ghost Blade to make him an assassin, and when he jumps into the backline and stands around the center of the enemy team, especially if they're pocketing their build into like square grid in the back, it can be super valuable because he jumps back, and if he's the only ninja on the board, he gets a little bit more attack damage to build his ult up faster, and having that stun interrupt plus the AoE damage can be super good. I've tried running death cap on him, but I was very underwhelmed. The damage output is just not as good, doesn't scale as well, and there's better targets for a death cap or a Ludens. That being said, getting a really good tank item like a Frozen Heart on him and then doing Morellos to make sure he ticks and applies the Morellos every time can be super valuable, and I think he should be focused more as a elementalist hybrid bridge character and also a initiator slash CC'er more than he is a damage dealer. Morgana's a 3-cost demon sorcerer, and again, probably one of the more underrated units in the game. She does suck pretty hard at tier 1 because she dies before her ult does anything. Just like Kha'zix, a lot of times because the ultimate takes a while to build up and go off, it can be tough to use her right. She does get the damage up front, which is nice, and then the CC comes later. But the thing about Morgana is if you get her to tier 2 and you're running a demon or a sorcerer build, she can be really great. And I've started running Morgana as more of a middle of the pack or frontline character. If you get a Frozen Heart on her or you get a Thornmail on her, especially running tank on her when she gets the sorcerer bonus, which gives her extra damage on top, it can be super great to keep things going with that build. So Morgana, a little bit underrated, can be used effectively in sorcerer builds, and actually I would encourage you to start picking her up more, because if she can live long enough and you put her in the right spot or you put tank items on her and she gets her ult off, it can be really invaluable. Poppy's a 3-cost Yordle Knight. I'm not a huge fan of Yordles. I don't think they're that good. It's just 2 RNG, and a lot of times if they're running sort comps or elementalist comps, Yordle means nothing. But Poppy did just receive a buff a couple days ago, which makes her a little bit more viable. I would really only pick her up if you're running 6 knights or 4 knights, because as an individual character, kind of like the Mordekaiser, she's not as good, but she can be valuable in Yordle or knight comps. As far as items go, she's pretty good as a sacrificial lamb with redemption. I love throwing Warwicks or Poppies up front and letting them die and get the redemption off right away, because it does damage and it heals my team. And I like having redemption in the beginning of the fight rather than at the end of the fight, so it has potential to heal more targets that are still alive. So overall, not a great unit. Really only pick her up if you're doing knights. If you want to go Yordle, she's a decent option, but as an individual unit, not that great. Rengar is a 3-cost wild assassin. He has a really good jump from the ability and works great in 4 wild builds or assassin builds, or both if you really end up getting the stars to align the right way. He can be a decent carry, but I don't think he's hyper carry status. He does work decently with Shojins because that will make him jump a lot more. And just like any other assassin in the game, IE or Sword of the Divine works great because it gets him more crits and makes sure that he's able to kind of stay in the fight and deal a lot of damage. Shyvana's a 3-cost dragon shapeshifter. She's one of 2 dragons in the game with Aurelion Sol. If you get them both and get the dragon passive, which is magic immunity, it's super great. It's just kind of hard to work them both in, because if you're going sorcerer, you're not really going shapeshifter, and if you're going shapeshifter, you're not really going sorcerer, right? Those 2 builds don't really blend as well. You can try to get 3 shapeshifter and then go for the 6 sorcerer. The reason it doesn't work as well is if you're going 6 sorcerer, you really only have 2 or more slots available, and you're gonna need tank, CC, and initiation. So you need a Cho'gath, you need the Sejuani, you need things up front to keep you safe. Gnar kind of fits in that category, but if you're going sorcerer, you don't want to waste slots on damage dealers like Shyvana or Nidalee or Elise, because you already have plenty of damage. What you need with the sorcerers is good support. So that's why they kind of don't jive as well together. You can run her in a wild shapeshifter comp, which is probably one of the best to run with shapeshifter. And she can deal a lot of damage as well. I like running a rapid fire cannon on her because it makes sure that she gets to her ult faster because she's not moving around as much. But also when she transforms into the dragon, she almost never has to move because she is ranged in that state, and she'll deal tons of damage and be applying the dot to everybody, and it's awesome. Vhagar's a 3-cost Yordle sorcerer. He used to be pretty bad. He's a lot better now since they fixed his ability to deal really good damage to a target. He'll do 10, 11, 12,000. He basically one-shots anyone he touches, which means that it's not as good as a AoE like Aurelion Sol or Brand, but if you get a Shojin's on him or a Seraph's or anything like that, you can actually get him to ult a lot, which means he's just a hitman. He's just taking targets out one by one, knocking them out of the fight, and it can be super valuable in a sorcerer build. As far as items go, Death Cap is good if you go up against a tanky team, ends up building him up a good bit. Shojin's really good, or any character you're trying to get to ult more, Rage Blade works out great, so you're gonna see this pretty commonly with sorcerers. Getting that extra attack speed on them means that they'll just build up their ultimate and use it a lot more, which is perfect for him. I wouldn't say that he desperately needs the Death Cap. He will one-shot most characters in the game unless they're super tanky or they have a Dragon's Tooth or they have the Dragon bonus. But in general, really good caster. Not the best sorcerer as far as a general purpose, but can be really good if you get him to ult a lot because he's just taking targets out. Volibear is a 3-cost glacial brawler. I don't know why I talked like that. So in the very early stages of the PvE, he was a hyper character. He got nerfed and adjusted when he was released out with the rest of the units. So a very powerful unit. He can still hyper carry. Generally, if you're running hyper carry, you want to get the rapid fire cannon on him because that means he doesn't have to move around as much. You want to get him to ult as soon as possible, but once he ult, he's done, which means he's not a good target for things like Shojins or Seraphs. But once he does ult, if you get good damage items on him, Rage Blade for extra attack speed. He does work with on-hit items as well, so you can get extra little bit bonus on that, because once he gets that ultimate and he starts doing crazy splash damage, he can be a good hyper carry, and he does fit well into glacial or brawler builds. Akali is a 4-cost ninja assassin, and personally for me, if I were to pick one ninja to put in for the one ninja bonus, it would be Akali. Some people say Zed, but to me, Akali, if you use her right, is far more powerful. So what Akali does is she's an assassin, she'll jump back to the backline, deal damage, and then her ultimate is her dagger throw from LoL. It has a relatively short range, but she can build it up real fast. I've tried this. Don't ever use rapid fire cannon on her because the rapid fire cannon makes her move far enough away that when she ults, she won't hit the target anymore. So don't do that. Hopefully they fix that bug, or maybe, you know, it's just a circumstance. Don't try it. I tried it. It sucks. But she works great with the Shojins, with the Seraphs, using that ability more and more. It doesn't hit as hard as the Evelynn's ability, but it can be generally good overall. I've run her in 4 ninja comps on top of that, and the 4 ninja bonus with Akali's base attack damage is nuts. She's a very powerful assassin. You want to position her a little bit differently than the other assassins so that she jumps to a target that's on the outside or works her way in. She's not as great when she jumps in the middle of the enemy team, but if she works her way in, that will make her cone go in front of her and hit more targets. It's really good. Aurelion Sol is a 4-cost dragon sorcerer, and if you played in the PvE, he probably is still giving you nightmares to this day. He's still very strong now, albeit after the nerf a little bit better and more palpable. If you get the 2 dragon bonus with Shyvana, it's nice, but again, Shapeshifter and Sorcerer doesn't work as well together. But Aurelion Sol is probably one of the more reliable carries or hyper carries for a Sorcerer comp. If you're going 3 or 6 Sorcerer, Aurelion Sol is probably your best target to put Rage Blade, Shojin, Death Cap on because he pretty much hits the whole board. It's a very wide line that hits almost any enemy that's in its path. And if you get a lot of ults off, he can end up wiping an entire team. So if you run sorcerers, Aurelion Sol is a great target and probably the one you want to look for the most because it generally will have the hugest throughput of damage by hitting almost anyone on the board, and he scales well with items as well. Optimal items for him is probably 1 or 2 Rage Blades and a Death Cap, or you can even do Rage Blades, Shojins, Death Cap. Generally, just getting him to ult as much as possible because it's such a great throughput is your best bet. Brand is a 4-cost Demon Elementalist, and probably one of my favorite units in the game. Just like Aurelion Sol, if you get lots of casts off on him, his damage throughput is massive. He also works great with Ludens and any cooldown reduction. And kind of like AoE units, it's good to be able to put the Morellos on him because a lot of times it will bounce to the same target again, refreshing the Morello's dot and dealing more throughput damage. But Ludens is really great, Morel's really great, and then Rage Blade also to make him cast a lot more. You can put Shojins on him. I sometimes, if I have other options, I won't put it on him because honestly, with just enough attack speed from the Rage Blade, he will ult enough on his own. But generally, just getting those ults off and splashing from target to target, really great unit. He's probably the best Elementalist you can get as well if you're running that build. So overall, great unit if you're doing Elementalist or Demon, or you just need a little bit more AoE damage. Brand is an awesome choice. Cho'gath is a 4-cost Void Brawler, but you can forget all that and just look at him as an initiator. He has one of the best team fight ultimates in the game. Him and Sejuani are probably the best choices for that slot because it's a massive AoE stun knockup. And if you put him up front there, generally if you get to 7, 8, or 9 on the levels and the teams are bigger, you need 1 or 2 team fight ultimates in there. Otherwise, you're just going to get wiped. Cho'gath is a great option. He does work in void builds as well, and if you want to do brawlers, you can, but his synergies are so secondary to him just being a great tank and a great initiator. So Cho'gath fits into almost any team comp. If you need an initiator, pick him up. He's super good. Items that work on Cho are general good tank items, Warmogs, Thornmail, Frozen Heart. If you really want, you can run a revive on him like Sejuani and just get more ultimates off. I generally don't like running a redemption on tanky targets because sometimes they'll die so late, or if they don't get positioned properly so they don't die right away. But in the right situation where Cho gets hyper focused by the enemy team and he gets his ultimate off, dies, and gets the redemption, it can be super valuable, but just make sure you position him properly. Draven's a 4-cost Imperial Blade Master, and I think it's super unfair that he ended up being tagged as a Blade Master because holy crap, he is terrifying. He probably exemplifies hyper carry better than any other unit in the game right now. If you put a lot of items on him, he is terrifying. He hits super hard, upwards of 2,000 per hit if he hits tier 3 and has 1 or 2 items on him. But not only that, he is a Blade Master. So if you get the full Blade Master bonus, he will attack multiple times. And honestly, the only time people don't die with Draven is when he's switching targets. He hits like a truck. And for that reason, even if you're not doing Imperial or Blade Master, you can put him in your build if you need extra single target physical damage in the backline. If you protect him properly, he is terrifying. But I think the best use for him is the 4 Imperial bonus where you double his damage, and then 3 or 6 Blade Masters where you get the extra attacks. And if you can get that build with a good front line in front of him, you're probably going to finish in the top 3 regardless because he hits so damn hard. He's also one of those units just like Vayne where if you need to know how to counter him, my favorite counters are Blitzcrank and Anivia. A Blitzcrank, when positioned properly, will pull him out of that back cluster when they're trying to pocket him. And I love Anivia for this because she will put down an AoE area that does damage, but more importantly, does an attack speed slow. This is an AoE that will usually cluster up on the back line, which means that it's easy to hit those protected units. And the attack speed slow is so valuable for keeping Draven away from killing everyone you know and love. As far as items go, generally big hitting attack items are great on him. Rapid fire cannon, bloodthirster, infinity edge, those kind of things work great. Just put them all on him. Rage blade as well, make sure he attacks like crazy. The last game I ran him, I had a tier 3 Draven, 4 Imperial, double rage blade, and a bloodthirster. And by round 20, I was like, I'm winning this game. There's no way I don't get first, and I did. He's just that good. So pick him up for extra damage, work towards Blade Masters. If you can get the Blade Master bonus, it's even better. Imperials work great with him as well. Overall, one of the best units in the game. Nara's a 4-cost, wild, Yordle shapeshifter. Really great initiator, great for the front line. Generally, people will still pick him up in that CC initiation team fight slot. The reason I don't put him in the same category as Sejuani and Cho'gath is because a lot of times his ultimate is harder to charge because he attacks slower, does less damage when he's not big, whereas Cho and Sej can build theirs a little bit easier. He also doesn't have the same stats as them as far as armor in the beginning, so he can die a lot easier without getting his ultimate off. But if you get him to tier 2 or you get 1 defense item, so make sure he gets his ult off, he can be super valuable because he usually will hit mostly, if not the entire enemy team. He moves them and repositions them, which is great if the enemy team's trying to protect or pocket key units like casters, Aurelion Sol, Draven, stuff like that. But he's also really great in wild bonuses and shapeshifter bonuses. So if you're running wild shapeshifter, a very common and very natural combination, you want Nara in there. Get him to level 2 as fast as you can. Because he's a 4-cost, his drop rate's kind of rare, so getting him to tier 3 is usually a fool's errand if you want to try and get there. But if you can, it's great. I just think that the initiators are really only best at tier 2, and then you want to put your damage dealers up to tier 3. So spending money to get him to tier 3, never really worth it in my eyes, but he can be pretty powerful. I also don't think he's very good with any attack items, but Titanic Hydra can work for him, and then general tanky items on top of that can work awesome. Overall, pick him up if you need a good initiator or you're doing wild or shapeshifter. Good unit, good front line, overall very good. Kindred is a 4-cost Phantom Ranger. She works in the 4 Ranger build and can work really well with Ranger Glacial, especially if you turn her into a Glacial. Overall, very powerful unit. She's hard to get online initially, but her ultimate has a lot of very specific situational uses. I've actually run her before doing Ghost Blade, making her jump back with the assassins, just like Shen, because she'll pop her ultimate, keep the assassins alive when they're in the backline. And generally, if you're going against a very burst-heavy comp, like 6 Sorcerers or Elementalist Assassins, her ultimate can be very valuable for that because it keeps everyone alive. I've won a lot of games where Kindred was the reason that I was able to survive crazy AoEs, and she's super good in that Ranger comp as well. I don't think she's as hypercarry worthy as, say, a Vayne would be in the Ranger category, but I think she can do well with damage items. But if you're gonna pick a hypercarry out of your 4 Rangers, I wouldn't pick Kindred, but you can put support items on her, or maybe 1 or 2 damage items or an attack speed item. But generally it's better to stack 1 on a target. Vayne, I think, is a better choice because she has a better passive, she has no ability that she has to cast, and she just scales pretty well. Leona is a 4-cost Noble Guardian, one of the 2 Guardians in the game with Braum. Works great if you're doing the double Guardian bonus to get extra armor, especially if you're up against attack-based builds like Assassins or Gunslingers. She has a decent ultimate. It's not as good as the Sedge, Cho, or Gnar Holy Trinity, but it can get some good initiations off. Generally, I wouldn't run her unless you need the extra armor from the Guardian bonus or you're running 6 Nobles. Besides that, she can be a little lackluster. In the right situation and positioned properly, she's a decent tank and a decent initiation with the ultimate. It just won't always stun everybody. It does have a nice slow on it as well, but sometimes that doesn't really matter, especially when targets are already in range of what they're shooting at. So if you're running double Guardian, sure. If you're doing 6 Nobles, sure. Otherwise, you probably don't need to fit her into your comp. There's better choices for initiation and frontline. For items, she's a great target for the support-based items I talked about earlier, getting the locket on her if you're running multiple, or just getting generally good Zeeks, that kind of thing, because largely the attack speed will apply to other people. You don't have to worry about positioning. So good support, Guardian, Noble, but other than that, she's about average. Sejuani is a 4-cost Glacial Knight. She works great in Knight builds, she works great in Glacial builds, and she generally works in almost any build anyway because she has a great teamfight initiation. Put her on the front line, make sure she gets that AoE stun off, and she will make a huge splash on the fight. And if you're missing any initiation, pick her up always. She does die a little bit easier than the Cho'gath at level 1, but when you hit level 2 with her, she's very safe. She has good armor scaling, and a lot of times she will end up saving the day for her. You can run a Shojin's on her if you want. She's also decent for revive if you're going to just sacrifice from the beginning and make sure she's on the front line. Although if you're going to run redemption, just make sure she's kind of by herself and she's not on a line of people, because you want her to die and get her ult off as soon as possible so you get value out of the redemption. Anivia is a 5-cost Glacial Elementalist. She works decently in Elementalist builds, and my story with Anivia is in the first week of playing, I thought she was hot garbage. And here's why. Her tier 1 blows massive chunks. The way her ultimate works, because it's a channel and she doesn't gain mana as well as some of the other Elementalists or Sorcerers, she will usually at tier 1 start her ultimate and then die. By the time, like on average, it's hard to keep her alive and keep her ult alive. For that reason, I generally don't put her in unless I need that 6th Glacial, or I'm missing an Elementalist, which is usually uncommon because the other Elementalists are easier to get. But if you get her to tier 2, she's pretty scary because that extra health and armor she gets from leveling up keeps her alive longer. It means that she has extra damage so she can get her mana faster. And I like putting damage items on her. You can do a Morello's because her ult ticks multiple times. Anytime you get multiple ticks on an ultimate, Morello's works great because it refreshes the dot. And you can also do Ludens or Death Cap. I like her as well against pocket strats where they're trying to hyper carry in the corner, because the AoE not only doing damage and slowing, it does attack speed slow. And that attack speed slow is great because 1, it's unavoidable. Once it's on top of the hypercarry and they're not moving, there's nothing they can do about it. It also lasts a long time if Anivia is tier 2 and you can keep her there. So against a Draven or a Vayne that's just hypercarry, or Tristana hypercarry in the backline and they're being protected and you can't get back there, I like running Anivia against that because the attack speed slow is pretty massive and it usually is pretty easy to get it back into that big pocket. Kha'zix is a 5-cost Phantom Sorcerer, and like Anivia, he's really hard to run when he's tier 1. When you get him to tier 2, super great. It's a very long channel with his ultimate, and that's the same reason why Anivia is hard to use, is sometimes Kha'zix will start his ultimate and then just die, and it's pretty worthless. But if you get him to tier 2, or you can find a way to protect him better, his ultimate does tons of damage. I've won games running Sorcerer with Kha'zix, and I gave him a Shoujins, I gave him a Death Cap, and then it does 1200 to 1500 damage to the entire enemy team. And if you can trigger it multiple times, it's great. It also can be pretty good with Phantom. So if you do Kindred Kha'zix, Mordekaiser pretty much sucks. So if you're gonna do like a Ranger build or you double Phantom out there, it's perfect because even though the Phantom bonus is random, you can't control who it goes on. If it goes on someone in the back and then Kha'zix ults, they're guaranteed to die. The Phantom bonus sets them to 100 HP. Kha'zix will definitely do more than that. So just like a Nivea, I would caution you against running him until he hits tier 2 because the tier 1 is pretty useless and a lot of times you won't get the ultimate off. But if you can find a way to protect him or you get him to tier 2, super strong, works great with 6 Sorcerer because you get the extra damage. And it's also damage that will regardless hit everyone on the board, which is awesome. So I think just like a Nivea, he gets some bad rap because tier 1 is pretty hot garbage, but you hit tier 2 and they're terrifying. Kayle is a 5-cost Noble Knight. She is a very powerful unit and probably the unit that I love and hate the most in the game. The reason I hate her is because if you get a Shoujins on her and she ults constantly, it becomes super annoying to try and keep single target kills going on throughout the whole fight because she's shielding everybody. I've also had it where she shielded someone right before they get hit by a Veigar ultimate. It's super annoying. She actually can hyper carry as well. She has good base stats. She scales well to tier 2 and tier 3. If you're running 6 knights or 6 nobles, she fits in perfectly. So if you're running either of those, pick her up as soon as you can. Get her to tier 2 as soon as you can. You can put items on her if you want. She works well with a Shoujins, a Rage Blade, and if you do Shoujins and Ludens, you get good AoE damage and defense on top of that. I've lost games where I had 5 units left and they had 1 unit and a Kayle with a Shoujins and I lost because I just can't kill anybody. It's pretty damn strong. She works great for Noble or Knight. You have to pick her up in those situations. Misfortune is a 5-cost pirate gunslinger and she's very misunderstood. She is a gunslinger, but you don't really want to put attack items on her. The reason being is when she ults, she channels it and spends a lot of time ulting, and then if you ult again, she's not going to be shooting. And so unlike the other gunslingers, you don't really want to do on-hit effects and you don't really want to do attack items because half the time she's not even going to be attacking. So I see her more as a gunslinger slash physical sorcerer, right? She's really good if you get a death cap on her or a Shoujins on her or even a Seraph because her ultimate, if you position her properly, can hit a massive amount of people and do tons of damage. So if you're running Gunslinger, she's good if she's the 4th or 5th Gunslinger. Just don't run attack items on her because it's really hard to kind of build it. And if you're lucky enough to get tier 2, I feel like she drops less than any other 5 cost in the game. If you're lucky enough to get tier 2 and you got a death cap on her, she will do insane amounts of damage and she will ult a lot as well. But she's kind of hard to work into the build. She doesn't fit the other gunslinger lineup, and a lot of times her gunslinger bonus doesn't really make a difference for her because she's ulting most of the time. But if you find her and she works with pirates or she works with gunslinger, just build her as kind of like a caster, physical caster kind of feel, and you'll be just fine. Swain is a 5-cost Imperial Demon Shapeshifter. Works perfect in shapeshifter builds. He has a really good overall value add to your team comp because he will heal himself. He does AoE damage. He's also really good if you put magic protection on him because he's just so hard to kill. Most of the time, unless he's on the front line, he will die to magic damage. So if you got a Dragon's Tooth on him and he transforms, he's pretty much just going to stay there for the rest of the match. He is so good. And if you get the 4 Imperial bonus, that affects his ability and the AoE. Overall, very good unit. If you're running Shapeshifter or Imperial, pick him up. Or if you're running Demons, you can too. Generally just a really good unit. Items for him, I would run Dragon's Tooth or Gunblade. Again, the Dragon's Tooth keeps him alive from the accidental splash AoE, especially since you're most likely going to be running him at the end of the game anyway. And that's when there's a lot of AoE magic damage going on. The Gunblade's great because it just makes his ultimate heal him even more and he becomes even more tanky. All good stuff. And finally, we have Yasuo, a 5-cost Exile Blade Master. He's the only exile in the game, and the way this works is you have to place him away from any units. If there's any unit that's adjacent to him in any of the hex cells, he won't get this passive. What the passive does is it gives him a start of round shield, which is super valuable. Yasuo is also one of those characters that you can put in almost any build and he'll be effective. He has an AoE knockup. He's really good at positioning himself on the side. He's really tanky even at tier 1, and he does really good damage. So overall, throw him in there. He'll get a little bit of a knock-up, interruption, a good initiation. He'll deal good single target damage. And if you're running 3 or 6 Blade Masters, he's one of the top to pick from. I would say Draven and Yasuo are the 2 best Blade Masters to put in there. So giving those extra attacks is awesome. If you get him tier 2, even better. His tier 1 is super valuable. His tier 2 is a little harder to get, but if you get him to tier 2, he's pretty damn scary. Very valuable. If you need extra damage or a little bit more initiation, throw Yasuo in there. Don't even think about it. As far as items go, Bloodthirster works great on him. Rageblade works great on him. Phantom Dancer, also a great choice. I personally will also slot him for the Guardian Angel. I think Guardian Angel is one of the hardest items in the game to use properly because most of the time when they die, they come back at a time that they're not really as useful. And sometimes it just doesn't work the way you want. But because Yasuo is generally just a general purpose unit that works all the time, bringing him back again, especially when you're forced to put him by himself, works well. Good unit, pick him up. And that does it for this guide. Thank you so much for tuning in and checking out my channel. I do daily videos and I've been doing tons of Teamfight Tactics recently. So make sure you subscribe, comment down below. And if you check me out on my live stream, I stream Mondays through Thursdays in the afternoon Eastern time. Come check me out. If you have any questions for me, ask me there. I'm happy to talk about the game or just general game development or life in general. Come talk to me. Let's hang out. I'll see you in the next one.